So, Zoe, thank you very much for joining us on this interview for the Spark Innovation channel for Offal.
Mm-hmm.
To start, could you just tell us a little bit about Sustainability First and your role there?
Okay, so Sustainability First is a charity and a think tank, and we're focused on practical solutions, sustainable solutions for the water and energy industries in particular. I'm one of 6 associates. We're a small operation, and I have a particular interest in customers in vulnerable situations, innovation and engagement.
And so, my first question, the question we've been asking all of our interviewees is, what is innovation to you?
For me, it's anything that's better than standard practice. So it could be something small that's working within the status quo, that's making a positive difference, or it could be something that's transformational and totally disruptive to the current order of things. But the most important thing is it delivers a benefit, either to customers or society more widely.
So what sort of benefits do you think innovation can deliver? So why should companies bother with innovation?
Well, my particular interest is in innovation in relation to customers with additional needs and on lower incomes. I think from that point of view, innovation can deliver better staff retention. Staff can take pride in what they do, and they're really proud to be working for the company. It can help in terms of communication and engagement more generally. So water companies, for example, have to get people to engage on issues like water reduction. If they feel positively about the company and how they treat their most vulnerable customers, it can increase their engagement more generally, which in turn, of course, reduces costs. It can have positive PR and communication benefits as well. And ultimately, it's about reducing costs, about doing things more efficiently, and about improving customer satisfaction.
And so I know that Sustainability First at the moment is sort of about to release a report entitled Energy for All, Innovation for All. Could you tell us a little bit about it and some of the recommendations that it's suggesting for customers in vulnerable circumstances?
Mm-hmm. So we're running a project called Inspire, and a report which we're about to launch, as you said, called Energy for All, Innovate for All. And the overarching aim of the project is about improving service delivery and quality of life for customers in vulnerable situations. We're doing that in 3 main ways. The first is shining a spotlight on innovative practice that benefits customers. The second is we did around sort of 50 to 70 interviews of lots of different companies and organisations, asking them what are the barriers to innovation and actually what are the enablers to innovation. How can we make this happen? And the last part of the project is a bit of a toe in the water looking at the future. So it's saying, okay, what's coming around the corner? What are the opportunities for customers in vulnerable situations that we can capitalise on, and what are the barriers to achieving those that we might mitigate so we can make sure everyone benefits?
Zoe, so we've talked a little bit around the risks and barriers of innovation, but now on the positive side, what sort of things could be done to enable innovation for customers in vulnerable circumstances?
So as part of the project, we looked at what were the factors. Some companies were very good at innovating and some not so good. And with the ones that were regularly innovating, we did a bit of a look as to, okay, what is it that they're doing that other companies aren't doing? And on the basis of that, Sustainability First have created a vulnerability innovation flight path, which is effectively a checklist for companies. Some of the things involved in it are the importance of building your vulnerability evidence base. So ensuring, for example, that you're capturing the experience of your customers with additional needs, making sure when you're introducing projects that they're properly evaluated, and not just the benefit to customers, but also the benefit to the business and the wider societal benefit is definitely an enabler, because from that people start to understand what is the real value to all parties. And I genuinely believe there is a kind of win-win from innovation, supporting customers with additional needs to the business as well. We found that incentives work, and they are needed. And they're needed because innovation to support vulnerable customers is riskier, it's more complex. Quite often it involves taking value from different sectors. For example, on affordability and fuel poverty, you need to involve the health service, you need to involve social housing providers, you need to involve the energy sector, the water sector, so it's a lot more complex. And because of those reasons, it takes longer to do, and incentives are very valuable. We found in the energy sector they had really prompted a sea change in activity and actually a cultural change, which was very, very important. So those two factors are significant. Innovation funding, I think, can help. So we spoke to a number of product manufacturers and service providers, and they said that quite often companies who own that relationship with the water customer in this case, they want a product that's already proven and tested. And actually, quite often that's not where they are. And for them to do that, if they're a very small operation, it can be quite difficult. So there's something about companies being prepared to take early ideas and to test them themselves and to put that investment in. But also for government, when they're thinking about innovation funding more widely, to think, actually, do we have part within this innovation funding, do we require people to have an inclusive approach or deliver for all customers? Frankly, at the moment, there's lots of innovation funds. Very few have a focus on vulnerability or inclusion, and that's shameful, really, given where we are. Improving access to data, it's a massive enabler. A lot of the innovations we looked at, we found that data can help customers budget more easily. It can help them better manage their energy and water use. It can make them feel more in control. It can help them feel safer. It can help their families feel safer and reassured. And that's not just sharing data held by companies, but charities being willing to share their data about innovation, government being willing to share their data, and all those different parties. And an example given was the London Data Hub, which has made a number of data sets available which other people can then use and innovate off the back of. So improving access to data, clearly in a privacy-friendly way, is very important. Trying to think if there's anything else that springs to mind. In the report's got sort of 18 recommendations in it, and there's a lot more detail in that. But fundamentally, of course, sharing innovative practice is critical, as we've talked about already. Sharing it not just within the sector, but across sectors and internationally as well, because it helps to demonstrate the art of the possible, and what's reasonably practical and affordable to do. And there are a lot of quick wins to be had. So.
Well, thinking about kind of those quick wins and things like that, I know you have 100 examples of fantastic innovative products and innovations that could be brought in to benefit vulnerable customers. Have you got any particular examples that you might like to highlight here?
So the Sustainability First report includes more than 70 case studies. It really is a chocolate box of ideas for companies. Some of them will be relevant for some companies, some for the water sector, some not for the water sector, but there's definitely an awful lot of learning in there, so I'd encourage people to take a look at the report. Some particular favourites of mine, and they kind of demonstrate as well the kind of spectrum of innovation. On the one hand, British Telecom, they introduced a kind of a scheme whereby you can nominate a third party, so that if your bill goes unpaid, they'll contact that third party. Now that third party isn't liable for your bill, but it means if you're an older person, for example, and you've gone into hospital, or if you suffer from mental health and you might actually be going through a pretty bad time, so you're not able to pay your bills, they'll contact that person to find out what's going on. What that means is the person's taken out of the debt path. They don't come out of hospital to find a demand for payment, which can be really worrying. Really simple idea, very easy to do. Another example is Western Power Distribution. They introduced two-way texting to help their customers. I would have thought, when we looked at this, I thought two-way texting, every company must be doing two-way texting. Actually, we didn't find a single other utility that was doing it. They were using it for blind and partially sighted customers. They realised that other types of customers, particularly young people with learning disabilities, like text because it's really simple. And so they found actually customers like it generally. They're rolling out to all customers, but that was available to 98,000, I think, roundabout, blind and partially sighted customers. And that got one of the gold awards for improving access. Really simple idea. It's about using technology differently. It helped them particularly during sort of during power outages. So it provided reassurance, up-to-date information. It was a very, very effective tool. On the other end of the spectrum, and one of my personal favourites, which when the innovations were judged by the consumer panel, it really split the panel. We had one person giving 1 star and one person giving 5 stars. It was something called Robo Braille or Census apps. They are able to translate the entirety of Harry Potter in a matter of sort of I think sort of minutes or seconds, I believe, into a range of formats, into a number of different languages, into Braille, into audio formats, and a host of other formats, which is a massive game changer, because at the moment, if a customer doesn't speak a language, you have to book in a translator, which is obviously time consuming, it's costly, it's inconvenient. And similarly with Braille, it's expensive to get lots of different documents made up in Braille. So it's an example of how, technology has made a process simpler, cheaper, and more convenient, and much better customer experience. And that's actually free to use for the customer. I think free to charities, if I've got that right, and I think for a company they can pay a license. And actually, since the report's been, since the project's got underway, WPD are now using that as part of their process. So lots of different examples.
So Zoe, you're going to be launching a report called Energy for All, Innovate for All.
Mm-hmm.
Where has this come about from?
The original idea was based on the experiences of people at Sustainability First and my own experiences at Ofgem. We thought there was a need for it. So a number of research reports have been undertaken, and Ofgem did some work. We did some work on the Priority Services Register, and we went out for a call to evidence, and we said, can you please make your suggestions for new services that could be provided for customers with additional needs? And I was really looking forward to it. I thought we're going to get a host of new ideas come back that can help people. And in practice, I think the only one that came back, and this includes from all the consumer groups as well, was something for called a knock and wait scheme, which was the idea that when an installer comes to the door, if the person has a mobility issue, they should wait a little bit longer for them to come to the door. And I thought, with so much innovation more widely in telecoms and other sectors, surely we can come up with something that's better than that. And so we approached a number of companies who were really keen to be involved in the project and recognised the potential. So we had involved in the end. Ofgem sponsored the project along with 3 energy companies: EDF, Scottish Power, and E.ON, 2 network companies: WPD, SGN, Smart Energy GB, because obviously we've got smart meter rollout in the energy sector, and 2 product manufacturers called Geo and Toshiba. We've been lucky enough to have involved in the project Citizens Advice and the Department for Business, Enterprise and Industrial Strategy, if I got that right, and BEIS as well, which is great. So the wonderful thing about that is you've got lots of different views from lots of different perspectives. So it was a real example of collaboration in operation. And the end product is, so the overarching aim of the project was to improve service delivery and quality of life for customers in vulnerable situations. We do that in 3 main ways. One, to shine a spotlight on innovation that can support customers with additional needs, and including those on low incomes. 2, exploring barriers and enablers. So we did a series of interviews asking different parties what their views were on what could we do to help innovation happen, and why wasn't there more innovation to support vulnerable customers. And lastly, a bit of a toe in the water, horizon scanning, looking to the future and thinking, what are the opportunities there for customers in vulnerable situations? How can we make the most of our kind of smarter future for all customers? And if there are any barriers, how can we overcome those to make sure innovation delivers for all?
So picking up on that last one particularly, what sort of what is kind of the future for customers in vulnerable circumstances? Is there some things that they can expect to see, or that they are going to need, that are different to maybe what they have now?
I guess this comes back to the question as to why innovate. And I guess there are 3 main reasons that we see it's important for companies to innovate in this space. One is about meeting existing needs. So, for example, we know there are millions of customers that struggle financially to afford their utility bills. And can we come up with new ideas to help them with affordability issues, is one example. We also know that customers face access challenges when using services. So how can we address those issues, for example? And then there's the situation of what's coming in the future. What future need is there going to be in terms of vulnerability? And we know, for example, there's going to be an increasingly ageing population, there's likely to be an increasingly disabled population, a rise in households, single-person households, which has implications because it means people don't have the same support networks there. And then there's the meeting unarticulated needs. So the National Audit Office, for example, did a kind of cross-sector report looking at vulnerability recently. And they said nobody's really captured what are the benefits of innovating to support vulnerable customers in terms of wider societal implications. You know, the savings that we can make, the services more widely that can be delivered more efficiently if companies themselves are innovating in this space.
Thinking about that point particularly, and thinking about how there's examples where potentially companies from other sectors, not just the water sector, are sort of looking at these challenges and trying to take innovative approaches to deliver more for them. Have you seen any examples of this sort of collaboration and sort of looking beyond the kind of traditional boundaries of the sector?
I think it's fair to say that as part of the project we looked at innovation not just within the energy sector, but we looked at water companies, telecoms companies, financial services sectors, and we also put a bit of a toe in the water overseas as well. We found that in terms of what companies are doing, there's a lot more sharing of innovative practice and good practice than there used to be, but actually there's still a huge amount that can be done, and in particular quite often companies, it feels, are benchmarking against each other, so it's kind of naturally, I guess, limiting how innovative they might be. So there's definitely scope to actually look at benchmarks across sector, and without a doubt the opportunity to look at innovation internationally as well. So we did find a little bit of arrogance in the sector to say actually in Britain we know best, other companies in other countries are a bit behind us. In some areas that was true. So on affordability, for example, we found that most other countries were taking the lead from the UK. But in other areas that definitely wasn't the case, and improving access to services was one of those areas where we were behind, I think, in GB.
Well, thinking about that, I suppose there's a question sometimes in terms of providing support for customers in terms of whether the strategy needs to kind of be one size fits all, or whether you need to kind of bespoke it, and whether there are different circumstances for different companies and things like that. Do you have any views on whether or how sort of transferable these sort of things are? Is it very possible for the approaches taken in energy, for example, to be taken in water and in telecoms?
I guess there's a couple of questions you've got.
Yeah, absolutely. I apologise for asking a lot, but
no, you got,
any thoughts you have?
So I guess the first thing is we looked at the kind of barriers to innovation, and there were some common barriers. I think we interviewed energy companies, but we also interviewed products manufacturers, service providers such as data analytics companies, and we asked, well, what are the barriers that you're facing to innovate? A couple of things came up. One was lack of understanding of vulnerability. So you can't innovate to solve the problem if you don't know what the problems are that customers are facing. So that's a key issue that needs to be addressed. The other was, we found within companies, staff working on vulnerability issues were really passionate and very committed, but they were facing barriers internally in getting good ideas to take off, as it were. And that was things like innovation teams operating in silos within an organisation. So one person mentioned that in their company, like fuel poverty was considered hot plates and innovation was robots, and never the twain should they, never should they meet. So there's issues around the kind of organisation of the culture, the understanding of vulnerability. Actually, innovation generally is risky. But for vulnerable customer innovation, it's even riskier, because if things go wrong, customers are more likely to suffer detriment, and it's more likely for that detriment to have a negative impact on them. Companies worried as well that the media would seize on a problem, and that they would get lambasted publicly for some innovation that failed in that space. And also they worried about the regulator having kind of sanction from the regulator as a result of innovation for vulnerable customers failing. So I think it's fair to say all innovation is risky. Innovation for vulnerable customers is considered even riskier, and therefore there's a kind of reticence there.
Do you think that there's any scope for involving customers in the process of innovating, especially for vulnerable customers, which can help to sort of manage these risks?
Oh, definitely. So an example is NPower, for example. They'd set up something called the Fuel Bank scheme, where they recognised, it came from their grassroots staff who'd been working as volunteers on a fuel bank, and they recognised that when people were coming in to get food, that they couldn't actually take hot food because they'd actually run out of energy at the same time. So they came up with this idea to provide a voucher of credit for customers alongside their kind of food bank. Now that idea came from a charity themselves, came from the food bank, and by working with the food bank they were able to mitigate the risk. And a lot of the people thought they were crazy. They were, in the wintertime, they were going straight into the debate of heat, or heat your homes or pay for food, and actually they managed to mitigate the risk by working with the charity sector themselves. In terms of involving customers in the development of innovation, a good example is, say, E.ON in Germany. They recognised they had a problem with affordability, and in Germany with disconnection. And so they decided to work with a range of parties to kind of co-design the solution. And one thing they didn't do is they went right back to okay, what is it? What are the trigger points that push you into debt? And from that, they recognised that there were a whole bunch of innovations they could make to actually prevent debt from forming in the first place. So it resulted, for example, in a new partnership with job centres, so that when a customer was made unemployed and they first went to the job centre, they were then automatically referred onto the company's social support schemes. So that's an example. So I guess it's involving customers in better understanding vulnerability. They have a lot of information that they can share. It's involving them directly in what are the solutions they need to address. They'll probably have their own solutions to the problems they're facing. And then there's something about creating customer demand. And one of the messages that came out of the project in particular was this notion that it's not the technology that's the barrier to innovation. It's more often the channel that the innovation has to go through, and also customer demand isn't there necessarily. So so an example of where an organisation has helped create customer demand is Riker. They've worked with Which and other disability groups to create an online platform where customers can give their views disabled customers can give their views on products and services. And so that's, then provides a kind of wealth of information that everybody can learn from.
Well, I think that's some absolutely fantastic insight. Zoe, I'm going to ask you one final question before we can get you out of this lovely cold weather. And that is, for you, along your journey of innovation, along understanding innovation, as part of this project, as part of your report that you're launching, what would you say is your one big learning, your one big message? I appreciate that's a massive question, but what would be your big learnings that you've taken away from it?
Well, one big learning, that's a hard ask. I think companies need to set up a culture where people aren't afraid to fail. They fail fast, they learn quickly, and they try again.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Zoe, for taking part in this interview, giving up your time today, and hopefully now we can go and get in the warm.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.